The roar of 70,000 voices shook the night sky. Freddie Mercury stood at the edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing under the floodlights. The magic tour was at its peak, and every note he sang seemed to set the crowd on fire. But then, something happened that no one expected. From the barricade below, a small child's hand reached up through the chaos. Thin, fragile, barely steady enough to hold. Freddie saw it, paused mid-stride, and in that instant the music, the noise, the frenzy, everything stopped. He knelt down, wrapped his fingers around that tiny hand, and time itself seemed to freeze. The arena of 70,000 fell silent, as if one heartbeat had replaced them all. It was no longer a concert. It was no longer Queen. It was a man, a child, and a fleeting connection that carried the weight of eternity. What no one in that arena knew was that this would be the last time Freddie Mercury ever held a child's hand on stage, and the way the crowd reacted turned that single touch into legend. It was July 12, 1986, at Wembley Stadium in London, a night already carved into history as one of Queen's most triumphant performances. The stadium was a living ocean of humanity. 70,000 fans packed shoulder to shoulder, flags waving, lighters flickering like stars in the dark. People had traveled from across Europe, some sleeping on sidewalks for days just to be there. Backstage, Freddie Mercury had been his usual restless self. He paced, sipped tea between vocal warm-ups, and joked with Brian May that he could feel the stadium vibrating before we even walked in. Yet beneath the bravado, his eyes betrayed a certain heaviness. He knew this tour was monumental, but he also knew that every show was taking more out of him than the last. That evening, however, nothing seemed to show. When Queen hit the stage, Freddie was pure electricity. He swung the microphone stand like a sword, prowled the platform with feline grace, and had the entire arena in the palm of his hand. Song after song, Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, sent shockwaves through the crowd. And yet, amid all the thunder and glory, fate had arranged something small, almost invisible at first. A child in the front rows, held aloft by his mother, barely strong enough to stand, but determined to lift his hand toward the man who had been his hero. In a stadium of 70,000, it was the smallest gesture that would soon eclipse the spectacle of it all. His name was Michael Carter, just 8 years old. Wrapped in an oversized Queen tour t-shirt, he looked smaller than the garment itself, as though the fabric was trying to protect what little strength his frail body still carried. Beneath his cap, his face was pale, but his eyes shone with the fire of a dream that had carried him through months of struggle. Michael had been battling a rare degenerative illness that doctors said gave him little time left. His parents, David and Anne, had spent countless nights at his bedside, listening to Queen records spinning softly to keep him calm. Love of My Life had become his lullaby. Freddie Mercury, with that soaring voice, was not just a rock star to Michael. He was a companion in the darkness, a light that helped him fight through pain. When the magic tour reached London, Anne knew she had to try. Through endless phone calls, favors, and the kindness of a family friend who worked security at Wembley, they secured 2 tickets. They carried Michael into the stadium that night, his small hands clutching a folded program, as though it were a treasure. As the show unfolded, Michael's energy flickered like a candle in the wind. He clapped when he could, sang softly when his breath allowed, and every time Freddie leapt across the stage, his face lit up with a smile that even illness couldn't dim. But when Freddie finally came near the edge of the stage, something in Michael stirred. He pushed himself upward, stretched out his trembling arm, and reached for the man who had given him so much hope. That one motion, simple, fragile, and almost desperate, set the stage for a moment the world would never forget. Freddie's eyes locked on the small hand reaching from the barricade. In the glare of the spotlights, he could just make out Michael's face, pale, exhausted, but glowing with a quiet determination. For a second, Freddie froze mid-step, microphone still in hand, as if the universe itself had interrupted the script of the show, the band noticed. Brian's fingers slowed on the guitar. Roger eased his drumming, and John instinctively softened the bass. The music thinned, then faded, until the only sound was the echo of Freddie's boots pacing slowly across the stage. 70,000 fans, moments earlier screaming with abandon, now fell eerily silent. It was as if the entire stadium realized at once that something extraordinary was unfolding. Parents lifted their children higher to see, grown men leaned forward, and an unspoken question hung in the air. Would Freddie stop? Would he, in the middle of one of Queen's greatest shows, abandon the spectacle for a single child? Freddie approached the edge of the stage, crouched down, and reached his hand forward. Cameras flashed in the distance, but inside that circle of silence, it felt as though there were only two people in the world: the boy who had given all his strength just to be there, and the man who now had to decide what to do with it. The moment stretched endlessly, every heartbeat magnified. And then, with one decisive motion, Freddie Mercury extended his hand, took Michael's fragile fingers into his own, and the arena, 70,000 strong, froze in reverent awe. Freddie didn't let go. His grip was firm yet gentle, his eyes locked on Michael's, as though nothing else in the world mattered. For a few breaths, the frontman, who had conquered stadiums, became simply a man kneeling before a child. The spotlight followed, bathing them both in a golden glow that turned the stage into a sanctuary. He raised the microphone slowly, but instead of launching into another anthem, his voice softened to a whisper that carried across the silent stands. "This little champion here came tonight to be with us," Freddie said, his words trembling with emotion. "And I think he deserves the loudest applause of all." The crowd erupted, not in wild screams, but in a thunderous, heartfelt ovation. Tens of thousands of hands clapped in unison, a wave of love directed not at the superstar, but at the small boy who stood trembling on the barricade. Michael smiled faintly, his lips moving as if to say thank you, though his voice was too weak to rise above the roar. Freddie leaned closer, pressing Michael's hand against his own chest, right over his heartbeat. Then, breaking from the set list entirely, he began to sing. Soft at first, almost fragile, the words floated into the night. "Love of my life, you've hurt me." The band, caught off guard, scrambled to follow, but the audience understood immediately. 70,000 people joined in, their voices blending with Freddie's as the song transformed from performance into prayer. It was no longer about music, charts, or records. It was a farewell gift, given from one soul to another, and in that moment, every person in Wembley Stadium knew they were witnessing something that would never happen again. As "Love of My Life" echoed across Wembley, the audience didn't just sing, they wept. Grown men who had followed Queen since the early days wiped their eyes. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering promises never to take life for granted. The chorus swelled like a tide, each note carrying Michael higher, as though 70,000 strangers had chosen to hold him in their arms. Freddie never broke the connection. His hand never left Michael's, even as he sang with raw tenderness that seemed to tear straight from his soul. To the crowd, it felt like Freddie wasn't performing anymore. He was praying. Every lyric became a vow, every note a benediction. Then something unexpected happened. Michael, frail as he was, raised his other hand and waved softly toward the mass of fans. The gesture was tiny, but the arena reacted as though a miracle had occurred. A roar of encouragement burst forth, and in that instant, the boy was no longer just a sick child in the front row. He was the beating heart of Wembley. Freddie pulled him closer, his arm wrapping protectively as if shielding Michael from the world. And then, in a spontaneous act, Freddie unclipped the white silk scarf from his microphone stand, one he had worn throughout the night, and tied it gently around Michael's wrist. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol, a promise that their brief connection would endure long after the lights dimmed. The stadium exploded in applause, but beneath the thunder was a silence deeper than sound. The collective understanding that they had all witnessed something sacred. What had begun as a rock concert had transformed into a farewell ritual, shared by an idol, a child, and 70,000 souls bound together in a single heartbeat. When the final notes of Love of My Life faded into the night, Freddie kissed Michael's hand gently before letting go. The boy was carried back into the arms of his mother, but the connection lingered, woven into the air, into the memories of 70,000 witnesses. For many fans, the concert stopped being just another legendary Queen show. It became the night Freddie Mercury reminded the world that humanity mattered more than fame. Backstage, Freddie was unusually quiet. His bandmates noticed his eyes red, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped water. "That boy," he murmured more to himself than to anyone else. It wasn't the flamboyant Freddie speaking now, but the private man, Freddie Bulsara, who had always understood the fragility of life. Word of the moment spread rapidly, first among fans who had been there, then through newspapers, radio, and eventually into the folklore of Queen itself. People didn't just remember the set list or the roaring anthems, they remembered the silence. They remembered how an arena full of strangers united around a child's fragile hand. Michael's family later said that night gave him something doctors could never prescribe: hope. Though his condition continued to worsen, he carried Freddie's scarf everywhere he went, refusing to let it leave his side. It was his proof that even in his weakest state, he had mattered to the greatest showman in the world. And for Freddie, the gesture became more than an act of kindness. It was a mirror. It reminded him, perhaps more than any ovation or accolade, of what his music truly meant. Not just entertainment, but connection, compassion, and the power to make even the smallest soul feel infinite. Long after the lights dimmed, at Wembley, those who were there carried the memory of that night as if it were etched into their souls. They didn't just recall the thunder of Radio Gaga or the fire of We Will Rock You. They remembered the silence, the child's trembling hand, and the way Freddie Mercury turned a rock concert into a moment of pure humanity. For many, it was the first time they saw beyond the flamboyant costumes, the staggering vocals, and the bravado. They saw Freddie's heart. And in that fleeting touch with Michael, they saw the proof that compassion could be louder than any guitar riff, more powerful than any stadium roar. Michael's story lived on. Though his time was brief, his life became immortalized through that gesture carried by every fan who whispered about the night the arena froze. To this day, that image, Freddie kneeling at the edge of the stage, holding a child's fragile hand, remains one of the most cherished moments in Queen's history. And perhaps that is Freddie Mercury's greatest legacy, that behind the legend, behind the crown and the stage lights, was a man who knew the value of love. A man who, in his last touch with a child, gave the world a lesson that still echoes decades later. That fame fades, but kindness endures. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more unforgettable, true stories of Freddie Mercury and Queen. And tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment where compassion silenced the world around you?